The waiting game. The dawn came cold and clear, frost glittering on the boardwalks of Medicine Hat like scattered diamonds. James stood at Dr. Harrison's front window, rifle propped against the wall beside him, watching the street come to life. A wagon rattled past. A shopkeeper swept his stoop. Two women in heavy shawls hurried toward the general store, their breath making clouds in the morning air. Normal. Everything looked so damn normal. Behind him, Eleanor moved quietly through the parlor, checking that Thomas was still asleep on the makeshift bed they'd arranged near the back wall. The boy had finally succumbed to exhaustion around 3 a.m, his small body curled tight under borrowed blankets. Sarah sat at the dining table, methodically cleaning her rifle for the 3rd time since sunrise. Daniel stood near the back door, arms crossed, his jaw tight with tension. Edmund Whitmore had arrived an hour ago with news from Regina. The telegram had been terse but clear. Criminal charges filed, warrants issued, consortium leadership formally accused. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like painting a target on their backs in fresh red paint. "Coffee," Mrs. Brennan announced, carrying a tray into the room. Her hands were steady, but James noticed the tightness around her eyes. She'd been through this before, he realized, waiting for violence to arrive, not knowing when or how it would come. The frontier made survivors of everyone or corpses of those who couldn't adapt. James accepted a cup, the warmth seeping into his cold fingers. "Thank you." "Sergeant Morrison sent word," Whitmore said quietly, settling into a chair near the fireplace. The old lawyer looked exhausted, his face drawn with worry. "Cross and Delaney were spotted yesterday afternoon at a trading post 15 miles west of here. They bought supplies, enough for several days. They're not running." "Then they're coming," Eleanor said flatly. She'd joined them, leaving Thomas to sleep. Her voice was steady, but James saw her hands clench briefly at her sides. "When?" "Morrison thinks tonight or tomorrow night. They'll want darkness. They'll want to make it look like an accident if they can. Fire, maybe. Or a break-in gone wrong." Whitmore paused, meeting James's eyes. "The mounted police are stretched thin. There's been trouble east of here, bandits hitting homesteads. Morrison can spare 2 men to watch the house, but that's all." "2 men won't stop professional killers," Daniel said, his voice tight. James turned from the window, studying the young man who'd become so much more than a neighbor's son. Daniel had killed for them, had stood watch through countless nights, had earned the right to speak his mind without softening the truth. "No," James agreed, "they won't. But they'll be witnesses, and right now, witnesses might be our best weapon." "Witnesses to what?" Sarah asked without looking up from her rifle. "Our murders?" The bluntness of it made Eleanor flinch, but James saw the logic in his daughter's thinking. Sarah had grown hard in ways that broke his heart, but that hardness might be what kept her alive. "Witnesses to self-defense," he corrected gently. "We're not going to let them catch us sleeping, Sarah. We're going to be ready." "We've been ready for weeks," Sarah said, finally meeting his eyes. "And still they keep coming." James crossed to the table, rested his hand on his daughter's shoulder. She was 19 years old and looked 30. The girl who'd arrived in Alberta 3 years ago, bright-eyed and full of dreams about the frontier, was gone. In her place was this woman, with shadows under her eyes and gunpowder stains on her fingers. "I know," he said quietly, "but this is different. The consortium's been exposed. Charges have been filed. Cross and Delaney aren't coming on orders anymore. They're coming because they're desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. Or desperate men have nothing to lose," Eleanor said. She moved to stand beside James, her shoulder touching his. "Which makes them more dangerous, not less." Whitmore cleared his throat. "There's something else. The territorial prosecutor wants additional depositions, specifically about the administrative challenge to your homestead claim and Silas Pemberton's death. He believes there may be evidence of witness tampering and murder beyond what we've already documented." "When?" James asked. "Tomorrow afternoon. 2:00 at the courthouse." Whitmore's expression was grave. "I know the timing is poor, but the prosecutor believes speed is essential. The consortium's lawyers are already filing motions to dismiss, claiming the evidence is circumstantial and that Hartwell acted alone. We need to establish the pattern of conspiracy before they can muddy the waters further." James felt Eleanor's hand find his. her fingers lacing through his own. They'd given so many depositions, relived so many traumatic moments for official record. Each time felt like reopening wounds that hadn't fully healed. But Whitmore was right. They had to keep pressing forward. "We'll be there," he said. "All of us," Eleanor added, her voice firm. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Thomas woke and ate breakfast in silence, his eyes too old for his face. Sarah and Daniel took turns at the windows, watching the street. James cleaned and rechecked his weapons until Eleanor finally took the rifle from his hands and made him sit down. "You'll wear yourself out before they even arrive," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "Rest while you can." But rest was impossible. James's mind kept circling the same questions. Where were Cross and Delaney now? What were they planning? Would they come alone or recruit help? Would they try to burn the house or force entry? Would they— Papa? Thomas's voice pulled him from the spiral of worry. His son stood in the doorway, small and thin in clothes that had grown too big over the past months. The boy had lost weight they couldn't afford to lose. They all had. "Yes, son? Are we going to die?" The question hung in the air like smoke. James felt Eleanor stiffen beside him, saw Sarah's head turn sharply from her position at the window. Even Mrs. Brennan paused in her work, hands frozen over the bread dough she'd been kneading. James crossed to his son, knelt so they were eye to eye. He wanted to lie, to give the boy false comfort, but Thomas deserved better than lies. He'd seen too much, survived too much, to be treated like a child who needed protection from truth. "I don't know," James said honestly. "We're going to do everything we can to stay alive. We have friends helping us. We have the law on our side now. But I can't promise you nothing bad will happen." Thomas nodded slowly, processing this. "I'm scared." "I know. So am I. But you're not showing it." James managed a small smile. "That's because I'm your father, and fathers are supposed to be brave even when they're terrified. But inside I'm scared too, Thomas. Anyone who says they're not scared in a situation like this is either lying or a fool. What's the difference between being scared and being a coward?" The question pierced James's heart. This was what the consortium had done to them, forced an 11-year-old boy to grapple with concepts of courage and cowardice that most men never had to face. "A coward runs when people need him," James said carefully. "A brave man stays even when he's scared. You've been brave, Thomas. Braver than most grown men I've known." "I don't feel brave. Brave people rarely do." Thomas considered this, then nodded again. He didn't smile. James couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his son truly smile, but some of the tension left his small shoulders. "Okay," Thomas said. Then quieter. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, son." The afternoon brought Sergeant Morrison and 2 constables, Fletcher and Webb, both young men with serious faces and regulation rifles. Morrison took James aside while the constables positioned themselves at front and back. "We've had no further sightings," Morrison reported. His weathered face was grim. "But that doesn't mean they're not here. Professional killers don't announce themselves. They watch, they plan, they wait for the right moment." "What would you do?" James asked. "If you were them?" Morrison was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the street. "I'd wait until late, after midnight before dawn. I'd make sure the house was dark, that everyone appeared to be sleeping. I'd come in fast and quiet, probably through a back entrance. I'd use fire if I could, to make it look accidental and destroy evidence. And I'd have an escape route planned before I ever made my move." James felt cold despite the afternoon sun. "That's very specific." "I've dealt with men like this before," Morrison said quietly. "Not often, thank God, but enough to know how they think." He turned to face James directly. "You understand that Fletcher and Webb are here primarily as witnesses and deterrents? If Cross and Delaney are determined enough, 2 men won't stop them." "I understand." "Good, because I need you to be realistic about this, Mr. Mackenzie. You've been lucky so far, incredibly lucky. But luck runs out. If they come tonight, there will be violence. People may die. Are you prepared for that?" James thought of Eleanor's steady hands documenting evidence, of Sarah's cold competence with a rifle, of Thomas asking about the difference between fear and cowardice, of Daniel standing watch hour after hour, never complaining. "We've been prepared for months," he said. "We just didn't have a choice about it." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "No," he agreed. You didn't. The consortium made sure of that. He glanced back at the house, where Eleanor was visible through the window. Your wife is a remarkable woman, Mr. Mackenzie. So is your daughter. You're fortunate. I know. Make sure they know it too, while you still can. The words hung between them, a reminder of mortality that needed no elaboration. Morrison nodded once and returned to his constables, leaving James alone with his thoughts. Evening came slowly, the sun setting in bands of orange and purple across the western sky. Mrs. Brennan prepared supper, beef stew and fresh bread, but no one had much appetite. They ate mechanically, fueling bodies that might need the energy before dawn. Thomas picked at his food until Eleanor gently took his bowl away and told him it was all right. After supper, they gathered in the parlor. Whitmore reviewed the questions the prosecutor would likely ask tomorrow. Sarah cleaned her rifle again. Daniel stood at the window, watching darkness settle over Medicine Hat like a blanket. James held Eleanor's hand and tried not to think about how fragile human life was, how quickly everything could change. I've been thinking, Eleanor said quietly, her voice meant only for him. About what happens if we survive this. When we survive this, James corrected gently. She managed a small smile. When? What happens when we survive this? Do we stay? Do we try to work the mine? Or do we take whatever money we can get and leave Alberta entirely? James had been asking himself the same question for weeks. The mine represented security, wealth, a future for Thomas and Sarah, but it also represented blood and fear and months of running. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to leave, to find somewhere the consortium has never heard of and start over. But another part, he paused, searching for words. Another part feels like leaving would mean they won, like all this suffering would be for nothing. It wouldn't be for nothing, Eleanor said firmly. We survived. We protected our family. We exposed their crimes. That's not nothing, James. I know, but you want justice, real justice, not just survival. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I understand. I want it too. But I also want to watch Thomas grow up. I want to see Sarah marry Daniel and have children of her own. I want to grow old with you, James Mackenzie, in a place where we don't have to sleep with rifles beside our beds. The longing in her voice made James's throat tight. We'll have that, he promised. However long it takes, whatever we have to do, we'll have that. Eleanor leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. I'm holding you to that. 9 o'clock came and went. 10 o'clock. 11. The house settled into watchful silence. Fletcher took the first watch at the back door, while Webb positioned himself on the front porch. Morrison had returned to coordinate patrols, promising to check in periodically through the night. James dozed fitfully in a chair, rifle across his lap. Eleanor sat beside him, her eyes half closed but never fully sleeping. Sarah and Daniel took turns at the side window, watching the alley where shadows moved with the wind. Thomas slept on his makeshift bed, his breathing soft and even, the only one of them who could find true rest. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. James felt time stretching, each minute an eternity of waiting. His wounded side ached where Hartwell's man had caught him. His shoulder was stiff from holding the rifle. His eyes burned with exhaustion. But he didn't move, didn't complain. This was what survival required. At 2:15, Daniel stiffened at the window. Movement, he said quietly. South alley. Instantly, everyone was alert. James rose from his chair, his body protesting but obeying. Eleanor moved to wake Thomas, her hands gentle but urgent. Sarah joined Daniel at the window, her rifle ready. How many? James asked. Can't tell. At least 2, moving slowly, staying in shadow. Daniel's voice was tight with controlled tension. They're good, very good. James moved to the front door where Webb stood alert. Constable, we have movement south side. Webb nodded and slipped outside to alert Fletcher. Through the window, James could see him moving around the house, rifle ready. The young constable's face was pale but determined in the moonlight. Minutes crawled past. The movement in the alley stopped. James felt sweat on his palms despite the cold. Were they watching? Planning? Or had they moved to a different approach? There, Sarah breathed. Back fence. 2 men. James saw them, shadows separating from shadows, moving with the kind of professional silence that came from years of practice. One was taller, lean, and quick. The other was shorter, but powerfully built. They paused at the back gate, and James saw moonlight glint off metal. Guns, Webb appeared in the backyard, his voice carrying clearly through the night. "This is the Northwest Mounted Police. Identify yourselves." The response was immediate and violent. The taller man fired, the muzzle flashed bright in the darkness. Webb dropped behind a water barrel as the bullet sparked off the fence behind him. Fletcher came running from the side of the house, his rifle raised. "Get down!" James shouted, pushing Eleanor and Thomas toward the floor. Sarah and Daniel were already moving, taking positions at different windows. The parlor exploded into organized chaos, everyone knowing their role, executing plans they'd discussed but hoped never to use. More gunfire erupted outside. James saw Fletcher firing from cover, saw the two attackers separating to flank the house. This wasn't a wild assault. This was tactical, coordinated. Cross and Delaney knew what they were doing. Glass shattered as a bullet punched through the side window. Sarah fired back, her shot controlled and deliberate. James heard a grunt of pain from outside, saw one of the shadows stumble, but the man didn't fall. He kept moving, circling toward the front. James positioned himself at the front window, rifle ready. The shorter man appeared in the street, moving fast despite what must have been a wound. James fired, missed, fired again. This time the man dove behind a water trough, returning fire that splintered the window frame inches from James's head. "They're trying to pin us down," Daniel called out. "Keep us from moving while the other one." The crash of breaking glass came from the kitchen. The taller man had found another entry point. James heard Mrs. Brennan scream, heard Whitmore shout. He spun from the window, saw the intruder in the kitchen doorway, gun raised. Time seemed to slow. James brought his rifle up, knowing he was too slow, knowing the angle was wrong. The intruder's gun was already trained on Eleanor, who stood frozen between Thomas and the danger. The shot that rang out didn't come from the intruder's gun. It came from Sarah's rifle, fired from across the room with the kind of cold precision that came from too much practice. The intruder staggered, his shot going wide, plaster exploding from the ceiling. He tried to bring his gun around for another attempt, but Sarah fired again. This time he fell. Outside, more shots. Fletcher and Webb were engaging the shorter man, driving him back from the water trough. James saw the man retreat into darkness, moving fast despite his wound. He was leaving his partner, James realized. Professional killers knew when to cut losses. The house fell silent except for harsh breathing and the ringing aftermath of gunfire. James moved to the kitchen, rifle ready, but the intruder wasn't moving. Sarah's shots had been fatal. Daniel checked the man's pulse anyway, then shook his head. "It's Cross," he said quietly, recognizing the man's face from descriptions. William Cross. Eleanor was shaking, her arms wrapped around Thomas. The boy was crying silently, his face buried against his mother's shoulder. Sarah stood motionless, staring at the man she'd killed, her rifle still raised. "Sarah," James said gently. "Sarah, put the rifle down." His daughter blinked, seemed to come back to herself. She lowered the weapon slowly, her hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. "He was going to shoot Mama," she said, her voice flat. "He was going to—" "You saved her," James said firmly. "You saved us all." Webb appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "The other one got away. Fletcher's wounded, took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live. Morrison's on his way with more men. They'll search, but Delaney knows these streets," James finished. "He'll disappear." Webb nodded. "For now, but he's wounded too. We'll find him." James wasn't so sure. Professional killers were survivors. Delaney would go to ground, tend his wound, wait for another opportunity. Or maybe he'd finally accept that this contract was more trouble than it was worth and leave Alberta entirely. Maybe. But James couldn't count on that. Couldn't afford to assume safety until Delaney was caught or confirmed dead. He looked around the parlor, at his family huddled together, at the shattered windows, at the body in the kitchen doorway. They'd survived. Again, but at what cost? How many more times could they face death before their luck finally ran out? Eleanor met his eyes across the room, and he saw the same questions reflected there. The same exhaustion, the same desperate hope that this might finally be over. Outside, dawn was beginning to break. The long night was ending. But James knew that somewhere in Medicine Hat, Jack Delaney was still alive, still dangerous, still committed to finishing what he'd started. The war wasn't over, it had only paused.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.